what we can see is that the family that originally owned these books seems to have commissioned a pretty well-known painter, this guy Cesare Vecellio, who's a sort of distant relative of the painter Titian, to come to their, what's called in the sources, their library, and to decorate all of these books. And I think we know that the family was also sort of collectors of things like weapons, paintings, natural curiosities, so like odd substances, taxidermied animals, all kinds of different things. And what seems to have happened is that they wanted to decorate or adorn their library in such a way that it would become like another one of these spectacles, something that you would actually travel, potentially quite far to come and see alongside all of these other curiosities or extraordinary objects. One of the 13 books that the binding has is an edition of Erasmus. The sort of humanist scholar Erasmus collected this enormous collection of proverbs and sayings, basically. And so the family seems to have purchased a copy of this from a family member in southern Germany, and they bought this book. And what's interesting is that Erasmus, being a sort of Protestant reformer, has his books put on a papal index of prohibited books at a certain point. And so at some point after purchasing this book, it seems that some family member, more likely some poor servant, had to go through the book and actually mark out with ink the author's name on every single page. And this is like several hundred pages worth of volume. And yet, the painter Vecellio chose to put a really recognizable portrait of Erasmus in his Fore-Edge painting. It's very similar to a famous painting by Hans Holbein of Erasmus. And so you see this interesting dynamic where there's an attempt to obey the rules, and to sort of cover up or reject, Erasmus's presence in this Catholic library. But at the same time, they have this beautiful image that clearly, for anybody who's informed during this period, marks this book as being by Erasmus. The painting is very recognizable as a copy of this portrait, and so it's a fascinating way of seeing the tension between these two imperatives in this period. One of the lessons is that books are objects that don't just sort of communicate meaning or have a role in people's lives, only insofar as what they contain within their pages. I mean, I think what these books show us is that, from the Renaissance right down to the present day, people have been intensely interested with what we might call sort of book decoration, and they've seen that as intertwined in some really important ways with the actual content of books. So books can meet, without detracting from the love of books and the love of learning, about what's within the books. You can also have books as sources of aesthetic pleasure, as sources of joy, as sources of curiosity, and that those things are interacting with each other in really complex ways. I think there are some interesting debates, currently about what is the role of the book in a sort of digital age. What keeps us coming back to the book, basically, and what distinguishes it from digital texts. And obviously, the physicality and the materiality of the book is one of those things, and we see that, quite richly on display in all of the sections of the exhibit. Thinking in a really productive way about the relationship between things like decoration, binding, design, all of these things in relation to what's inside of a book, I think is one of the really interesting takeaways here.